I'm really excited to have Steve Pressfield here. He wrote a book that I've actually read 3 times, the only book I've read 3 times, Gates of Fire, and I literally cried during some scenes in it of how part of us is captured by the bonding and by the inevitability, not just of death, but of facing our fears. Steve Pressfield reached out and said he'd love to do a webinar, and I thought, what a fantastic candidate to teach us some wisdom about tenacity, about dealing with the demons in your head that we deal with every day. So Steve, welcome to Custodian. We're called Custodian. Welcome to Custodian. Welcome Down Under. It's great to have you with us. A best-selling novelist of many, many novels, that sort of thing. I think Gates of Fire, I was reading, is studied by some of the military. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. And
Incredible.
Thank you for having me, John. It's great to be on Custodian here. Thanks for having me.
Just tell me a brief about your life, because I think when I read The Art of War, it was just like, wow, you really did struggle early on.
Well, I guess the short version is that my first book was published when I was 52, and I started trying to write when I was 22. So I'm sort of a late bloomer there for anybody that's watching, that I hope that gives them some hope. But it was a dream that I had forever. I worked many jobs along the way. And, at a certain point, there was a kind of a breakthrough, and I've been, writing ever since.
The first book became a movie where, we all saw the movie and everything like that, was based on the Bhagavad Gita. Just tell me about how that came and when you realized you had something very, very special. How did that all happen? Were you studying the Gita at the time?
I had always been a fan of the Gita, and I read it, like you, not as immersed as you are, but I probably read it 10 times or something like that. And it was still way over my head, but I just knew it was really deep and great. I'm a big believer as a writer in stealing. And so I thought, I'm going to steal, one day it just hit me, I'm going to steal the structure of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a mentor-protege story of Krishna, God in human form, as the charioteer of the great warrior Arjuna, instructing him in karma, duality, non-duality, yoga, previous lives, all that sort of stuff. And I said, and I'm going to change it. Instead of a troubled warrior, it's going to be a troubled golf champion. And instead of his charioteer, it's going to be his caddy. And I love the idea that when God appears in the material dimension, he doesn't appear as like a king or at the head of proud armies, but as a servant, like Jesus came as a man of sorrows, right? So I love that idea that Krishna was serving as a charioteer, but yet, able to explode the world at any moment. So that was where that idea came from. But it really was one of the first ideas I've ever had as a writer that absolutely seized me. Like when I told my agent that I was going to do this, he fired me because he thought it was such a dumb idea that I was just tanking my career by doing this. But I was just seized and had to do it.
Like JK Rowling and Harry Potter, I think was 10 or 11 publishers said, this is going to go nowhere. No one's going to read this book. So sometimes we have to listen to that inner sound inside of us, keep on moving forward. When you were writing the book, just take me back to when you were writing the book. Did you know, was it something that came right through you, or did you start writing? How did it actually, what was the process that you used?
It came through very fast, like 4 months, 5 months. I hardly changed a word. It violated all the rules that I knew. At the time, I also thought it was a completely uncommercial idea. I thought it was a really dumb idea that nobody would be interested in a golf story based on a Hindu scripture. But I just loved it so much, I just had to do it.
Oh no, it's just simply amazing, and and what a great movie. Just a great movie. How has that affected your life going forward? What changed about you then at 52? What changed about Steven Pressfield, about you, about your habits, about the way you saw life? Not just the book and the success, but how did it change the way you saw things?
Up until then, just prior to that, I had had about a 10-year career as a screenwriter. So I was a working writer at that time, but I had never really written something that came from that source deep inside. So when Bagger Vance kind of came out of me, it was like maybe all the bad luck I had had, all the 30 years of trying, had finally turned a corner in some mystical way that I couldn't, you know, ever since then, uh, everything I've done, which is about 20 something books, has felt that it was really coming from me. Like before, I felt that the scripts I wrote and so could have been written by anybody. Anyone else could have written the detective story I wrote, blah, blah. But since then, I felt I'm the only guy that could have written the books that I wrote. They're quirky enough, they're from me enough. So that changed my life completely. And
Yeah.
I can't explain it. I just think, the gods, did something and a corner was turned.
I have kids 8 to 15 that have been kicked out of every other school called Toogoolawa. And I tell the kids, you know what? Everything in life is a story. And it's a story of things happening to us or things that we actually do. But inevitably, we've got to look at that story and say, am I a victim or am I a director? And, my upbringing, I started a school for youth at risk because I was one of those youth at risk and all that sort of thing. But I never felt traumatized. I never felt I was a victim. I always felt, wow, something inside all the tests that you had was building me to a stage where, okay, you need to have actually showed some resilience. And I was going to ask, were you like dejected, like paragraph or chapter 1, the yoga of dejection, the yoga of real depression, all that? Were you at a particular stage of saying, well, I just can't do anything that's going to be, solid? Or did you actually surrender? Did you hear the voice? What actually happened?
Do you mean at the point of writing that book?
Yeah.
I was not dejected. I had put in like a 10-year career in screenwriting, and I was sort of starting to get success. I really hadn't had any at that point. But then it was like a kind of a soft lightning bolt. It wasn't like the hair stood up on top of my head or anything, but the story just seized me, and I felt like I was in the possession of some, that I just had to do it, and I was guided to do it. I just kind of sat down and it just came. That had never really happened to me before.
Fantastic. What are the 3 great habits that you have now that you just a non-negotiable, that are a habit for success, for prosperity, for living? What are the 3 great habits that you have on a daily basis?
The first habit that I have is I get up ridiculously early. Like I set my alarm for 3 o'clock, and I'm up at 3. I go to the gym first thing in the morning. I'm there long before it opens. I do that just to sort of to get a little bit of success early in the day. I go to the gym really because it's something I don't want to do. It's something that I have fear of, and it's something that hurts. And so I want to do that first thing to kind of get momentum going. Otherwise, my mind starts going in a bad way. The other thing is that I work every day, maybe not 365 days a year, but every day. And I'm definitely a believer in the goddess. I believe that ideas come to you from someplace else. So if someone were to ask me what my profession is, I would say I'm a servant of the muse. And I do whatever she tells me to do, I do. The other habit that I have is I'm a big believer in just grinding. On the one hand, you look for inspiration and a flash of lightning and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, as you well know, John, you got to be there every day, rain or shine. And whether inspiration comes or not, you got to be there at the wheel, grinding away. And that's a habit to me that really separates, failure from success. If you can hang in there every day, and I'll say one other last thing, I'm a believer in delayed gratification as opposed to instant gratification. So I'm always looking, years ahead, and I don't care how much it hurts in the moment. I'm looking down the road.
Fantastic. I mean, it's a language that we understand. I've said to my tribe, do 2 things every day you don't like doing, and learn to like your dislikes, a Sufi saying. Do one thing and do it well. Do one thing and do it well. You know, when we invest and, you know, make money, everyone's trying to be smarter and do this, and they're chasing stuff. Just do one thing and keep on doing it, keep on doing it, keep on doing it. You're just a great example of someone who just writes and writes and writes, and all of a sudden this muse, as you call it, God flows through you, and wow. And, you know, we've seen that as well, you know, not just in the success we've had, you know, financially, but also just how it affects the people around us, because you're still amongst things moving and dealing with, you know, issues of life. Your house burnt down in the fires a few years ago. Tell us about that, because when I got your email on that, and I thought, oh my goodness, that is just incredible. And, you know, but you didn't, and no tone of I'm a victim or anything like that. This has happened. Diana and I are moving. What was the experience that you can teach me?
You know, I'm not so sure I've learned too much about it. I know at the time when it happened, which is about 1.5 years ago, I just sort of felt, you know, we went back up to our house, what had been our house, and the entire neighborhood was gone. It's a huge fire here in Los Angeles, like 13,000 people lost their homes, you know. So, and I remember looking at the mess, which was, you know, just a disaster, and just said, okay, we're going to rebuild, you know, no problem. But I must say that since that time, it's been a lot harder. And I've had many nights where I kind of wake up with anxiety and that kind of thing. And I realize this might not be too inspiring to our listeners here tonight, but that I've never really learned to grieve over that. You know, I've sort of pushed it down. And that's kind of my next challenge for that. But what I do tell myself realistically is there's a lot of adversities in life, and this is not one of the worst. You know, there are a lot of worse things, a lot of people going through a lot harder stuff than that. And also here, so many people suffered with this that you can't feel sorry for yourself for that. But it's definitely been a challenge. And the one thing that's really kind of held me through this thing is working with this thing, you know, just keeping banging away. The one thing I would say to what you just said, John, about do one thing is I would say do the one thing that you're really good at, or that you're really called to do, that you really love. The thing that nobody else can do as good as you. That's the one thing I would say.
You know, it's interesting as I hear you talk, I listen because I'm studying the Gita myself, detachment, and how we actually, one of the things we need to learn is detachment. And I think to myself, like you're in your 80s when your house burnt down. It's sort of like, how do we let go? And you say, well, how do I grieve and all that sort of thing? And the story from Arjuna and all that is that it's not real in a lot of ways. They're just things, you know, that we conjure up. And I was listening to, I don't know if you've read Anthony Hopkins' bio, but it's interesting. He's got a little saying in that the way he plays some of his roles is detached but awake. And he is a person who is very, very much detached, but very much present.
I'm a big fan of Anthony Hopkins. I've seen him one time where, I'm sure you've seen this too, John, where they were asking him, what would you say to a young actor, you know, starting a career? And he said, you know, in his great voice, he said, believe, believe, believe. And I love that, you know, because that's, you know, that as we were talking about before we started here today, life is flowing through us and things are happening behind the scenes and that we don't know about in a good way. You know, forces are working toward us, but and it's easy to not believe in that, right? To have a contemporary cynical attitude, so I'm a believer in believing. That's for sure.
Good on you, Steve. Look, it's been fantastic sharing with you today. I love your 3 takeaways. We use them. We preach them, everything like that. And you know, hearing from somebody, an older, wiser counsel is always a blessing. So blessings to you. Cheers.
All right. Thank you.